Good evening, everybody. Hope I am audible. It's another Saturday and last Saturday of the month, and we are again here hosting another very important talk. This time we are having Professor V. Selvakumar, and this is for the new participants. This is the webinar series of Archaeological Sciences Center, IIT Gandhinagar. We host a talk on the last Saturday of every month on very important topics. We have started our journey nearly more than 1 year back. I mean, this is our 14th lecture in our lecture series. And today we have one of the most eminent speakers with us, Professor V. Selvakumar. He is an associate professor in the Department of Maritime Archaeology in Tamil University, Thanjavur. He's a well-known figure. I mean, I don't think he requires any introduction. The entire scholarly world knows about him, his contributions, his background. Graduating from Deccan College, he did his PhD from Deccan College on the prehistoric aspects of Gundar River Basin near Madurai. Then he proceeded to, carry out various kinds of investigations. One of the most important contributions I can remember is at Pattanam, where he did the initial excavations, and he was instrumental in identifying the most important remains there, along with other archaeologists. And he has worked in several parts of India, and most importantly at Arikamedu. I remember meeting him for the first time at Arikamedu. When I was a student trainee from Madras University, I learned Harris Matrix system of excavating a trench from him. And he has also worked abroad, like at the site of Berenike on the Red Sea coast, which has very good contacts with the Indian subcontinent. So he's well-read. He has published several articles of repute. And he is indeed a hallmark scholar, one can say, in the present day scholarly world. I welcome Professor Selvakumar, and it's really a great honor to have you with us. And I really thank you for sparing some of your valuable time. Initially, many of you may remember we organized this talk last month, but due to unavoidable reasons, we could not hear him last month. But again, he agreed to deliver his talk this month. So without wasting much time, Professor Selva, I would request you to please take over and deliver the lecture.
Okay, thank you, Dr. V.N. Bawkar and Professor Michel Donino and Shobha for inviting me to make a presentation on the megalithic culture of southern India. Now I'll share my screen and then we can proceed. Yeah, I hope the screen is visible.
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah, the title that I'm going to talk about today is Iron Age Early Historic Megalithic Cultures of Southern India. Initially, I gave the title Megalithic Cultures of South India. Then I added Iron Age Early Historic because that gives a clear chronological marker to this particular topic. When we talk about the Iron Age culture of southern India, it is a formative phase that precedes the early historic and then succeeds the Neolithic culture. And we see a lot of cultural developments taking across southern India. And it is a prelude to the early historic period when script was introduced and a lot of other developments, long distance trade and many other things took place. In fact, we have evidence of long distance trade even in the Iron Age, but unfortunately we have not done enough research to understand the long distance internal and external trade networks. Currently, our understanding of the long distance trade of South India mainly starts from 2nd century or 3rd century BCE. There is a potential to understand the long distance trade networks in the pre-3rd century BCE. Now, my presentation has about 190 slides, and I have divided this particular topic into 10 section, which you can see here: definition of terminology, history of research, burial typology, and architecture, the space for the dead on the landscape, habitation sites, periodization and chronology, material culture, biological remains, belief system, and contemporary burial cremation rituals, and issues and discussion. This presentation, I have made it as a simple, and sometime I have shown some of the basic images because I feel a lot of students are here so that they can understand and see the basic megalithic types. So this particular map shows you the peninsular India and with some sites in northern part of India. And what I'm going to talk about today is the southern India, mainly comprising the states of Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. That is going to be the focus. I'm not focusing on the Vidarbha megaliths in Maharashtra region. Coming to the megaliths, we need to understand clearly what this particular term means and what are they. Megaliths are actually a large burial monument. Megaliths are found in many parts of South India. They are widely present in South India, also in Vidarbha and Maharashtra. They also occur in limited numbers in Central India, Northern India, in the Himalayas, and also in Sri Lanka. In Northeastern India also they occur, but they are in different later and different cultural contexts. The megalithism should be seen as a kind of a burial tradition that may have started in the late Neolithic period, because now, based on recent research, scholars are arguing that it might have started in the late Neolithic period. Earlier, scholars used to trace the origin of megaliths to Central Asia, Western Europe, and outside India. Now, they are thinking that this tradition might have started locally. This is an important understanding that we have had during the past 2 or 3 decades. Earlier, that was the fashion, or because the idea of diffusionism was very predominant, and everything was attributed to diffusionism. Now we are trying to understand culture in a particular the relationship between the humans and the environment, or rather, as some scholars like Bauer talks about, political ecology, trying to see environment and human as part of the same system. So our approaches have changed over the 100 years. This particular, the term megalith means, mega means large, lithos means stone. These are basically burials or monuments erected for the dead people, and most often they are found in a separate secluded area, sometime on top of the hill, sometime nearby the tanks. Some of the scholars, they consider megaliths is misnomer because some of the burials are not truly mega or lithic, in the sense that they are not, the stones are not big, and some of the burials like urns, they are not at all associated with any stone. That is why some scholars consider the term is misnomer. But if you visualize this as a burial tradition, the way of treating the dead, we can understand megalithism broadly refers to the way of burying the dead or offering worship to the dead or commemorating the dead. That is how we should see. So sometimes we prefer the term Iron Age early historic burials and monuments. We cannot just use Iron Age because not all the megaliths belong to the Iron Age. Some of them were erected even during the early historic burials. Excuse me. And now we'll come to the characteristics of the megalithic tradition. The megalithic burials are rich and diverse in burial goods or grave goods, and there is an ideology and a belief system behind the building of these burials, and it is often related to the treatment of the dead and monument building. There is definitely monumentality attributed to some of the burials. They are so huge, which requires a lot of investment and organization of labor, and also it indicates variation in access to the resources of the people in the society. Maybe there existed some kind of status or social distinction or differentiation, which we may call hierarchy, or something like some kind of a social variation among the people. Hierarchy is a difficult term to apply in this context, and it indicates the social relationship of the dead, also the status, and also it has some symbolism. So we could see the megaliths as landscape features because they are confined to certain landscape. Sometime in some areas certain burials are found on top of the hills or on top of the rocks, so there is some landscape significance to these burials. Why a particular burial was erected in a particular area, there is some significance, and we have a lot of research carried out on these megalithic burials from the colonial period. We have the earliest report by Babington, who excavated a burial in Malabar in Kerala, what is now Kerala, and also before him, Colin Mackenzie reported some burial from Padur near Madras in the early 19th century, somewhere around 1810. His report was unpublished. Professor Padaya has published, and similarly, you have several scholars and antiquarians and administrators during the colonial time. They explored these burials, documented them, because these burials have some kind of attraction. Even if this happens today, when people accidentally dig these burials, they collect a lot of complete pots, complete very beautiful parts, and that is why it has attracted antiquarians. And many of the museums in the world, they have grave goods from the megalithic burials of South India. And later on in the post independence period after 1950, we have a lot of excavations taking place. We have the publication by Wheeler just around the turn of middle of the 20th century. He excavated Brahmagiri, and then we have report and publication by Guru Rajarao, Leshnik, Sundara, KP Rao, Udayaravi Murthy, and Rajan and Brubaker and Mohanty and several other people. And recently, Kathleen Morrison, Sinopoli, and Bower, and a team of researchers from US, they are working on the site of Kadabakale and around in that area. And also another team of researchers from India and Japan. They are working, they have brought out a publication in 2018. So numerous excavations have been taking place across South India, but still our understanding of these burials remain slightly in a very backward condition, probably because we need to do more detailed and intensive research. But now we will see some of the megalithic burial type. What is a type? Archaeologists are obsessed with types because their approach is always empirical, though they go from below to the top. Say they collect data, they collect material culture, they classify, and then try to interpret and come up with some kind of conclusions. So archaeologists are obsessed with typology the same way they have dealt with megalithic burials. They have classified them into dolmen, cane circle, and stone circle, and cyst burial and alignment, and so many categories they have created. But there are problems in the typology, because when we have a typology of a megalithic burial just based on the surface feature, it may not be accurate. When we want to construct a typology, we need to understand the internal and the external structure. This is very important, but this is a problem, because when we want to do a typology just based on exploration, it is just not possible to understand the complete structure of the burial. So we need to completely excavate. This is one of the problem with the typology of the megalithic burials. We have numerous types of megalithic burials, like urn burials marked with stone circles, cane heaps, pits marked with stone circle, cane heaps. That is how we should visualize these burials. We should also describe the internal feature as well as the superstructure, or what is visible on the surface. Visibility is very important for the megalithic burials, because when they wanted to erect a menhir or a tall standing stone, it also communicates, like the way the temple gopuras of the modern day, they communicate some message to the people. Similarly, the tall standing stones had some kind of communication. Probably these menhirs became hero stones in the later period. So there is a lot of symbolic meaning behind the erection of particular stone, tall stones. Similarly, we have cyst, dolmenites, dolmens, menhirs, alignments, kodakal, tupikal. They are particularly confined to Kerala. We also have rocket caves. These are the main burial types. We also have anthropomorphs, or human-like stones erected in the context of the burials. So I'll show some of the images of these burials, how they exactly look like. This is a cane circle. There is a boundary circle, and which is filled with a lot of stone packing. Sometime in some of the field nowadays, what the farmers have done is they have accumulated all the stones, whatever was acting as hindrance to their cultivation, into the burial. So nowadays we get a modified version of the original cane circle. These are called formation processes. This is again a cane circle. So when you look at a particular site, you will see stone circle in many places. You can easily identify. Sometimes you can even use Google Earth or remote sensing, and you can easily identify them. This one is a very important menhir, which is about 25 to 30 feet in height. We recently visited this site. It is known as Kumarikal Palayam. And interestingly, the local people have built a narrative. See, what happens is, many of these megalithic burials, though they could be old, people have created their own story, and they start worshipping. This practice also happens in Kerala. Some of the rocket caves have been converted into shrine. Sometimes they are also treated as part of the rituals associated with the local temple. This one is a menhir. It is found at Kumarikal Palayam. It is near E Road. One of our students explored this area. And it was identified by Professor Rajan and his team earlier. Interestingly, local people have a narrative on this. They say that one particular woman with her children went to see a drama, and when she returned, it became so late, and she was so scared that the people in their house would not allow her, so she became stone. And the local people have a strong belief that if you offer something to this particular stone, this kind of god, Kumarikal. Kumari means lady, women, or it actually means an unmarried lady, unmarried woman. But here, the local people have the tradition. She came along with her children. And this is something interesting. So you get a lot of these megalithic monuments being converted into these kind of shrines. But one problem is that we have these kind of monuments. We have just the menhir standing. We are not able to determine its age. This is the problem we have with the megalithic burials. We have numerous burials that have been excavated. Very few of them have radiocarbon or accurate dating. As far as we know, this burial tradition might have started somewhere around mid 2nd millennium BC, or 1300 or 1200 BCE, and then it continued till say 5th century CE for more than say 2000 years. So when you have a megalithic burial on the surface, to which period you will assign? This is a fundamental problem we have with the megalithic burials. We have a lot of grave goods, we have a lot of material, but the problem is we are not able to precisely date. We have more burials. I'll not spend much time on that. This is burial found inside a cyst excavated by Rajan at Tandikudi. This is a cyst burial with urn inside. Actually, cyst burial is a kind of box created with a granite slab. And these boxes, they have 2-3 chambers. Sometimes they have entrance. They have also a porthole, a kind of hole in the shape of trapezium or square or round or oval, and or in the keyhole type, and it is attributed to their belief in soul. We don't know. Some scholars say that these people believed in life after the death, so they wanted to leave a hole. We have all kinds of arrangement in these cyst burials. They are like a kind of house for the dead. They have proper furniture. Sometimes people probably offered rice or other grains. We have recovered them from the site of Kurundal, and also you get similar grains from the site of Adichanallur. So definitely these people thought these dead people had their own world or own life, afterlife, so they had to give offering for their safe living, and they worshipped them. That is how we have these burials. We have these kind of burial types on the hilltops. Whenever they build these kind of structures, they artificially create a boundary and secure these burials. These are some of the burials found in the hill regions. You find both in Karnataka, both in Tamil Nadu as well as Kerala, these kind of masonry structure protecting the several burials within an enclosure, what we call a stone enclosure. Then we have this kind of urn burials, where you have this urn and over which we have a capstone. So such burials are very common in Tamil Nadu. This is a burial urn found nearby MG University, Kerala. And this is an umbrella stone. This is a very typical kind of type found in Kerala. And it is near Kasaragod. It is actually in northern part of Kerala. Then we have a dolmen. This is from Porkalam in Kerala. This is a table-like structure. You can see a bench here and also the porthole in the form of a rectangular shape. This is something very interesting. One problem is that why people selected a particular burial type for a particular person. Still, we are not able to understand, we are not able to get into their mind. This is another burial called Kodakal because it resembles the shape of a Koda or umbrella. This is a very rare form confined to Kerala, and it is made of laterite rock. And we have a lot of such burial types. This is again from Chirumangadu, from Thrissur, which is a very important archaeological site. And Chirumangadu also has another burial type called Hootstone. So archaeologists have described these burials, excavated and documented, document the material culture, skeletal remains, and all these material culture found therein. So this is a slab circle from a site called Anakara in Kerala. We have such burials found all over Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. I'm not showing all the images. I'm just showing some representative images so that students can understand. This is a dolmen with a double dolmen with the porthole found in Marayur region. We also have similar burial stone circles in Amravati in Andhra Pradesh. And these are certain typology of these burials documented during the colonial times. This one is an alignment. It is found in a place called Vibhudihalli in Karnataka. Several scholars have worked on these particular burials. And Adichanallur, another famous site where we have a lot of these urns found in a small area. Even within a small area, you find several urns. That means that the people have used this particular area repeatedly over a long period of time. Recently, central government has announced a museum at this site. This one is a sarcophagus. In some of the burials, you find this kind of sarcophagus. This one was found in Shankavaram in Andhra Pradesh. Currently, it is in Madras Museum. This one is in the shape of a ram, a male goat. This is another important burial type. You get this kind of burial pottery within the burial. This is from Sembian Contiur excavated by Tamil Nadu State Archaeology. Here you can see certain post-firing graffiti marks. Sometimes these urns are covered with lids. And many of these, unfortunately, many of these sites have been destroyed. Originally, I think South India must have had 5,000 or plus sites. Because of the developmental activities in the last 5 decades, many of these sites have been destroyed, and they are getting destroyed because it is impossible to protect the high number of archaeological sites, especially the megalithic burials which are found everywhere. The preservation is one of their problems. Some of the archaeological sites have been preserved by Archaeological Survey of India, like Sanur, near Chengalpat, near actually Madurandakam, which is a very important site that was excavated by Archaeological Survey of India. You have these kind of decorations on the burial. This one is a cyst burial from Brahmagiri. Here you can see that how carefully they have constructed and how they have given several lines of buttress walls so that the box will not fall off, and they have very carefully placed a stone circle outside. So this is the kind of architecture we have on these burials. Coming to the distribution of the burial type, this is a statistics. It is based on Darshana's publication. Here you can see that this urn is very predominant, followed by cane circle and other types. So urn burials were widely used by the people in all landscapes, whereas the other forms, they were adopted only in particular region. For example, menhirs are very limited in number. These menhirs could be a prelude to the later on hero stones. So this one shows the distribution of megalithic sites in Kerala. This is an old database. Currently, there are more than 1,500 sites in Kerala. There is a problem with the concept of site also. We cannot just say that a site has only this many burial in Kerala, because most of these findings are just accidental findings. You get to know about an existence of the site only when it is destroyed by any developmental activities or construction or canal digging or road laying. Otherwise, a site's existence is unknown. This is one of the problems why we are not able to understand the actual the distribution. And also the portholes, as I said earlier, the holes found in the cyst burial, they have different orientation. We are not able to attribute any specific meaning to that. And coming to the architecture, if you look at these megalithic burials, they are very interestingly having very beautiful planning and organization. They did not just build a burial. So they had a long standing plan. Sometimes these burials might have been constructed much after the death, and when they were organizing the rituals. And these burials expose the cognitive skills of the people and their special organization, and they were designed with the specific furniture. So it generally indicates their outlook and their organization of space. And megalithic architecture itself is very interesting, and how they were arranging the goods, and how they were creating the types, how they were executing that, how they were designing this particular space. If you look at literature, we get to understand how these burial sites are called. If you look at the early Tamil literature, we get to know that they were known as Kadu, territory of the nature. So even today, the place which is livable is called Nadu, or country, a livable space. In the case of burial, it is always called Sudukadu or Idukadu in Tamil, and it is more attributed with the nature. Sometimes these burials are found very close to the settlement. Sometimes they are found away nearby the tank, or sometimes on hilltop, as it happens in the site of Kodaikanal. So when you look at these burial structure, you can look at them from different angle. They have a core structure, external structure, boundaries, orientation, passage, entrance, door, lids, pillars, recess, and so many architectural features could be seen. You also see variation in ground plan, sometimes square, circular, and rectangle. So this one is from Kodumanal. You can see how they have created the central rectangular structure, and then there is a small porthole in the shape of trapezium. Then there is a small entrance small chest in the beginning, and then you have a stone circle. Then there is a slab circle. That means that these people have very carefully built the burial space. This one is a rocket cave. I did not show the image before, and it is very specifically confined to Kerala, mainly in the laterite area, where you find a diverse variety. Actually, Krishnaras from State Archaeology Department has excavated many of the rocket caves, and he has put his images in the Facebook. We can see very interestingly, these rocket caves have benches inside, sometimes hangers where things could be hung, and they have very beautiful design. That means that it was a specialized job, and there must have been specialized rock carvers during this period. And this is one particular type, and you have an entrance, and then you have this facade. This one was found at Katakombal at Thrissur, where you have these four chambers and the central courtyard. This definitely indicates their view of their arrangement, architecture. This looks something like the Vihara architecture. We have a central courtyard and then chamber all around. In a way, we could deduce from this how they were conceiving space, how they were planning the space. Though we don't have access to their residential architecture, this can definitely tell. Similarly, they have used a diverse variety of raw material and whatever is available in a particular region, and they have used dry masonry walls like what we have here. Very interestingly, this kind of dry masonry can be seen even at the site of Brahmakiri, and precisely this is the method used in some of the temples of South India for building. So what it is called veneering on the exterior surface, and then both the exterior internal as well as external surface, they do veneering with the dressed slab, and they leave the interior undressed. So this kind of construction technique was adopted here, which is very interesting. You can see here also a similar technique has been followed. And this is the site of Anakara, which has been excavated by School of Social Sciences, where they have 3 chambers within a central courtyard. This is partly damaged. This is another interesting anthropomorph excavated at Motur in northern part of Tamil Nadu by Archaeological Survey of India in 1978-79. This is very interesting, and this has some kind of symbolic significance. Now, our problem is why they erected such kind of images, why such kind of stones as part of the stone circle. Do they indicate some kind of status of the dead? So we could assume that this person was an important person in the society, because not all the burials have such kind of markers. So definitely there is a particular reason behind erecting such an anthropomorph. We also have this kind of external structure, a pointed menhir at Kodumanal, and KP Rao has found some women like stones, anthropomorph, from Tottigutta in Andhra Pradesh, and you can see another one, and these were found near Palem in Andhra Pradesh. These ones are from Karnataka. Then we have this one from again Cheraman Parambu in Kerala. And so definitely these burials indicate some kind of planning and organization of space. I'll not go into the detail. Now you can see another rocket cave at its facade entrance, which is designed with multiple frames. It exactly looks like a very detailed entrance to lintel and other features arranged in a contemporary house. So this is very important, how these people were creating these recesses. here to the particular entrance of a burial. So we get a lot of ideas from these openings, how the openings have been designed, how these burials have been closed. And Sri Kumara Menon and Mayank Wahia, they have studied the astronomical significance of some of these burials and their orientation. And currently we are only able to understand the orientation on which day these burials were erected, or in which day they were aligned according to certain astronomical aspects. And also we get to know about their idea and design. We are not able to understand their belief system and the significance of the burials, but by looking at the literature and other sources and contemporary practices, we can definitely understand that these were part of the ancestor worship and also hero worship and the way of their belief system. So the burials are actually a markers of cultural, socio-economic conditions of the individuals who were buried. So their status in the contemporary life determine the nature of their burial and the kind of kinships and social groupings or association they had that determined the particular treatment of their burial. This is what we understand. So by looking into the burial types, we see a lot of variation. We can attribute these variation to economic factors, attitude, social network, importance of the individuals, and a lot of other factors determining this particular specific design of these burials. Coming to the habitation side, one of the problems we have with the megalithic burials is the lack of habitation site associated with the burial site. This has been talked about researchers so much, and nowadays not much scholars accept this view. Definitely the habitation site must have been nearby. Only thing is these burials are highly visible. Since we are not focusing on the habitation, we are not able to find. Otherwise, I feel that the habitation sites are there. You can't expect to people live elsewhere and come and bury their dead. Definitely people lived nearby. Similarly, we found evidence of habitation nearby the burial at the site of Anakara. And that is a very important site in Kerala, for which we have obtained some certain C14 dates which have not been published. Therefore, we have these burials, sometimes multiple burials associated with one habitation site. Probably these people were using them as territorial markers. Because of this, we don't have a one-to-one association with the burial. Earlier, the classic site of Adichanallur, where they have been arguing that there was no habitation. Recently, even ASI identified a habitation deposit nearby, and also Tamil Nadu State Archaeology Department has excavated the habitation for the past 2 years. So therefore, this is not an issue. Definitely, habitation sites exist. As I already said, it is our approach. Sometimes we try to project too much based on limited excavation. In fact, I would say based on our recent exploration in Tamil Nadu, we have a lot of work to be undertaken on the ground. It is impossible to talk too much about these sites and their significance without undertaking very detailed archaeological exploration. Again, our exploration is very limited. In many of the sites we have not documented completely. Now I'll come to the periodization and chronology, and this particular practice of erecting burial perhaps began in the Mesolithic period. We have evidence for these burial in the Ganga Valley, and then we also have burials in the Neolithic period. More particularly, the Southern Neolithic is bracketed between 3000 to 1200 BCE. Then the beginning of Iron Age is problematic, and it may have begun around, say, the middle of second millennium BC. And though Rajan has reported a date at Telangana on a sword, he ascribes that to 1500 BCE. Similarly, for the megalithic tradition, Kathleen Morrison has a date of 2030 BC from the site of Brahmagiri, which she has published in Revisiting Brahmagiri research paper. So we have evidence of this early historic period based on recent dating. They're trying to date the early historic beginning to an earlier period. This is also an area where we need more research. This is placed between 500 BCE to 500 CE. So we have most of these megalithic burials confined to the Iron Age and early historic. A few probably they continue in the early medieval period, maybe urn burials, and we should see the megalithic tradition as a kind of practice that emerged in the Iron Age and continued in the early historic and later period. So coming to the specific chronology, we have, as I already said, we have early dates for Brahmagiri and Kachibauli, where K.P. Rao has done dating, Halur, Mangadu, so and also Tadakanahalli, they have a OSL dating. And recently, for the site of Telugunur, they have a dating of 1500 BCE based on the dating of a iron sword, traces from iron sword. And for the site of Tamrabarani Valley, they have got a date of 1100 BCE, which has been published recently by government of Tamil Nadu and Tamil Nadu State Archaeology Department. So with these megaliths is associated the question of the beginning of Iron Age, which is again problematic. We need to undertake further research. While we have these dates, we need to understand the associated assemblage. So we don't have many habitation deposits where we can get an understanding of the material assemblage. When you want to understand a culture, the associated assemblage is very important. I think we need to work more to identify the habitation site and obtain dates from the habitation sites. Only then we can understand the entire assemblage of that particular culture, what archaeologists call as a assemblage or collection of material culture. So only when we have these assemblages and C14 dates side by side, we'll be able to better understand the development. Similarly, we also have evidence for the continuity of these megalithic burials in the Sangam Tamil literature, where we have reference to Thari and Karpadukkai. So several burial types are referred to. Nedungal for menhir, and several other terms are referred to, which is very interesting, which definitely tells that the megalithic burial tradition continued in the later period also. Okay, now coming to the material culture, I'll show some images quickly because I don't have much time. So we have different types of ceramics like white painted black and red ware, white painted black ware, plain red ware, black and red ware, and also survival of late Neolithic. Here we have some issue. So we should not see that the Mesolithic way of life stopped all of a sudden, and then the Neolithic culture began, and then Neolithic stopped all of a sudden, and then Iron Age culture began. So probably this multilinear development of culture, see continuity of hunter-gatherer groups in the Neolithic as well as Iron Age, and then continuity of agro-pastoral communities even after the Iron Age might have happened. So some areas we may get overlapping ages. This is very important, and MLK Murthy's work in Andhra Pradesh and also my research in the Gundar Basin clearly demonstrate that the microlithic using hunter-gatherers continue to live in the Iron Age. So clearly we are getting population diversity in the Iron Age, which is very important. That is why the ceramics also tell us the continuity, and the early historic tradition also occurs. Also, the megalithic tradition also occurs in the early historic period. For example, the russet-coated painted ware, otherwise known as Andhra ware, definitely indicates the existence of megalithic burials in the early historic context. This is very important. If at all we can distinguish Iron Age burials from the early historic burial, this russet-coated painted ware is a one important material. We get diverse variety of tableware and cooking ware, storage jars. Definitely, we can understand how these people were leading a life. They were consuming different kinds of food, which can be understood by looking at their burial furniture, metal objects. We get a lot of swords and everything. I'll quickly show everything because I don't have much time. We also have painting on pottery, and interestingly at Kadabakale we have painting and design, and same thing is also found on rock art. Sometimes archaeologists tend to categorize the raw material, the archaeological material, into megaliths, into rock art. We are categorizing material cutting across their time period. So ideally, as I already suggested, some of these remains should be categorized as Iron Age or early historic or based on the chronology, for which we need definite radiocarbon dating. So you see some of these black and red ware materials. I'll quickly show decorated pottery, urns, and Neolithic kind of forms surviving from the later period. This is from Dr. Jayasree's area in Kasargod, Kerala, finials and urn with uplift decoration. This is the russet-coated painted ware, which is a good chronological marker for early historic megalithic burial. And similarly, a stone celt with engraving, probably it is of later period, reused in a later context form at Sembi and Kandiyu. These are certain vessel forms of the period, and this is again russet-coated painted ware, and ceramics, more ceramics, iron weapons. We also get a lot of iron weapons from the burial, diverse variety indicating craft specialization. Sometimes we get chisel. So definitely the Iron Age society in South India had diverse communities and craft specialization. So that is indicated by the metal objects. These are certain metal objects. These were found from the site of Auroville, and also a lot of other goods, burial goods, beads. These are from Auroville excavation by Ravichandran, and some horse stirrup. These are also certain status symbol. Only some of the burials get horse-related ornaments. And also, interestingly, we get gold jewelry in some of the burials. Some of these gold jewelry burials could be later in date. This is where we have problem. As I said earlier, we are dealing with 2000 years of material from the megaliths, and we are not able to understand the fine chronological resolution. For example, which is 1700, which is say 1500 BC, which is 1000 BC, which is first century BC. That kind of classification is not possible in the case of megalithic burial. Some more gold objects, gold flowers. Definitely these must have developed in the early historic period when these ports were very active, like Arikamedu, Pattanam and other ports were active. Definitely these raw material came in. So the megalithic burials, some of the megalithic burials were definitely of later period. We have evidence in the Nilgiris in the form of Roman coin of a very late period. So we also have these kind of gold ornaments from Adichanallur, copper objects, and this one is a tiger excavated from the site of Kodumanal tiger bronze image. So definitely bronze metallurgy was also very dominant here. This was probably also a status symbol because we don't have a good source of copper in South India. You get diverse variety of these object. This is from the site of Auroville. Again, they indicate the workmanship or the long distance connections they had. I'll quickly show the other material, cornelian beads, and so many other materials. So definitely these people were specialists, and they were interacting and they were associated with the long distance trade network. We also have shell objects coming. So these kind of, they were found from the site of Sanur, and definitely they suggest the long distance network. This one is from Odugatur, and Sanur also produced such shell objects. And also stone objects, terracotta, and several other material. These are the organic remains, rice, cloth, textile from Kodumanal, and human skeletons have also been studied, and much more DNA studies could tell us about the nature of the people, and we are not able to understand much except the demography and the paleopathological aspects. And a lot of work has been done by Kennedy, Lucas, Walimbe, Veena Mushrif, and other researchers. We also have a definite symbolism emerging, burial graffiti. They are very common. They are seen as a kind of clan symbol and associated with a particular group, because we are finding same type of symbol associated with the specific burial. And they are also very common. We also get to know about their concepts behind the death and burials by looking at the contemporary burial practices. Probably there is some continuity. Definitely there is a lot of change. I documented in some of the burials this cremation tradition. They erect these kind of boxes from the soil and they perform the ritual, and this is very much interesting, how these people were arranging this ritual. And now I come to the final part of my presentation, issues and discussion. What is the significance of these megalithic burials? What are the issues? We definitely understand that people believed in some kind of forces, natural forces, which are ancestors and their power, and they invoke them for their social life, invoke their support for their existence in the social life. They became part and parcel of their life, and these attitudes are reflected in the early Tamil literature, and they became center of worship. Even if you look at many of the contemporary communities, sometimes ancestors are worshipped as Kula Devata or Kula Deivam. So these burials might have some kind of inspiration for the development of place of worship. We see clearly in the case of stupa worship, which should be seen as a continuity of tradition. Coming to the theoretical issues and problems, mainly Bauer and Morrison, Johansson, they talk about the problem with the cultural history approach. How we are trying to approach these archaeological cultural history cultures as within the cultural history framework. This is a problem, and we can't much rely upon these diffusions, and also look at this as adaptation, mainly, and culture cannot be merely seen as an adaptation. That's what Bauer says, that we cannot oversimplify as agency and causation. While the cultural history approach gave too much importance to diffusionism, the processual archaeology or new archaeology gave importance to adaptation. Here they say that the culture and nature is separated. They are seen as opposition. Rather, they should be seen as one. This is actually, Bauer has written a paper on political ecology, where he is trying to see this entire monumental building from Neolithic down to the early historic as part of one kind of movement, as part of political ecology proposed by Richelieu. This is very interesting. We need to change our approach, which is very important. And today only I was looking at some of the references in Tolkappiyam, the early Tamil grammatical work. Here, this work also classifies organisms as single sense, 2 sense, 3 sense, 4 sense, and 5 sense, and humans are seen as one with 6 sense. So this is a kind of idea that was prevalent in our Indian philosophy. Here we clearly see no dichotomy between humans and nature, and humans are seen as an extension of part of nature. This is the somewhat similar argument is proposed by this people who advocate for ecology. And coming to the social formation, conventionally people try to argue whether megalithic people were nomadic, pastoral, or agrarian. We cannot fit into one. In my opinion, as I already said, it is a very complex kind of development. in order to understand the cultural development in southern India, we need to undertake more research. If we are working on megaliths, we cannot look into the megaliths alone. We should look for a continuity. We should also look into the Neolithic as well as early historic. And definitely, I feel based on the recent finding, and also from Puduthini, Ravi Korisetter and Boivin, they have excavated a sarcophagus. So I strongly believe that this megalithic tradition might have emerged in the late Neolithic context. So we need to focus on the Neolithic Iron Age transition, which I feel is very crucial. South India probably attained, South India as well as South Asia, population diversity probably from the Neolithic time onwards. And that is very important. So we could see some kind of chiefdom level organization in the Iron Age, and there were clashes and battles for control of territory, and the megaliths were some kind of prelude to the hero stones. So this kind of fight for cattle continued in the later period in Tiruvannamalai region. We also get a lot of Pallava inscription. So we are seeing a diverse kind of formation. For the best example comes from Sangam literature. Even though the literature is later in date, it tells us about the landscape, how different kinds of groups, Kanavans, who were dependent upon shifting cultivation or Punam cultivation, they were also doing hunting. Then there were pastoral groups. Probably the megalithic communities were diverse. We try to see homogeneity just because archaeologists construct the megalithic culture, because it is our own construct, because we see from the material cultural point of view, what was their emic understanding. That is where we should look into the literature. So I definitely see we cannot see megalithic society as homogeneous, because we construct the culture, we see the material culture having identical, shape and design. Sometimes material culture can cover, that means mask the identity and the diversity. This is a problem. So definitely Iron Age development is very important, and we should see the continuity. And I did not include that we have evidence of this peppercorn coming from the mummy of Ramses II, datable to 1200 BCE. And also cinnamaldehyde has been found by Divori Namdar in some of the Levantine sites, datable to 9th century BCE, for which there are a lot of references available. And also we have evidence of crops coming from Africa coming into. So we should not see megalithic as a one type of remain, like the way we classify evidence rock art, megaliths, and art and architecture. Rather, it should be seen as a kind of holistic ecological approach in which megaliths had played a role. So only by looking at it we can understand. Definitely there were there existed different technologies, as we see, and craft specialization. Unfortunately, as I said, we are not able to build up the finer resolution of these developments. So I think the megalithic cult was definitely indigenous. It might have emerged in the Neolithic cultural context. And also we get to know how these people were approaching the dead based on the status of the individual in the society, as well as the status of the people who buried, and several factors are responsible. And we should not call this as the disposal of the dead as we use in archaeology. It was a kind of worship or respect for the dead. Similarly, the landscape archaeology aspect is also very important. These people were communicating, conveying some message by building these megalithic burials. They were marking their territories. They were controlling the territories. This I have argued in the Upper Kundar Basin. Sometime one burial, one habitation site might be associated with multiple burial sites, because they wanted to have control over area. It is a way of symbolically taking control. It so happens sometime in South India, you can see some people, they want to have a control over a hill. They go and create a kind of place of worship there. It can be seen as a common practice. Probably these people chose to bury the dead in different parts of the uh, landscape around their settlement. This I have noticed in the Gundar Basin, where we have a huge hillock. You find burials along the way, all along, which we can call it as site. Again, the concept of site is very problematic, and we need to go into documenting, and especially after our recent excavation in the Coimbatore region, I think we need to be more cautious. We need to undertake more groundwork, more exploration before coming to a conclusion. Finally, also, I want to highlight that there have been questions: who were these Dravidians? Who were the people of South India? I think there is some kind of connection between the megalithic population and these people who are there. And again, definitely people might have migrated also. Right now, there are a lot of DNA studies are going on, and we cannot just conclude that these groups migrated here. Things developed, everything developed in a particular region indigenously. Definitely, there existed migrations, connections, interaction, and also some of these cultures developed locally. So what I would suggest is, before answering these kind of questions, I think these South India needs to be further explored, and many of these sites need to be excavated. I don't think we have completely understood the archaeological record, which is partly damaged, which is partly under the contemporary settlements. I think we have a long way to go to undertake systematic surveys and select the right site. That is very key. One of the problems that we face is the selection of the site. We are not able to identify the correct site that has remains of Iron Age. So most of the time we end up excavating either early historic or late Iron Age. So probably because of this particular reason, we are not able to get the material culture of the Iron Age period. So what is essential now is to date all these burials or look for some potential habitation site that has evidence from late Neolithic down to the Iron Age. Then you map the material culture and then correlate with the radiocarbon dates. Then we will be able to understand the cultural development in South India. With these few points, I end my lecture. I hope I have not taken more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Selva. It's an amazing talk. After listening to your talk, it's really long way to go. I mean, it's not that we have been studying the archaeology of South India. Megaliths have been studied for the past maybe 100, 150 years, but it is insufficient looking into the data, looking into the theoretical perspectives, and also looking into the problems which you have mentioned. It's a very long way to go, and it's really mind-boggling to listen into the complexities, right from the construction of a megalith, identification. Maybe it like you, as you rightly pointed out, it may be their very old household, like it may be their household after their afterlife. They were constructing a kind of a residence for themselves. Like, I mean, that could be one of the meanings, but it has a very long continuity, and it is very less understood over a period of time. And the kind of problems, issues associated with the habitation sites. I mean, it's really mind-boggling. And the territory markers which you mentioned, it's indeed a very plausible explanation. And what I think is that we are searching habitation sites very close to the megaliths, right? I mean, it should be slightly far away, and the nearby Iron Age sites could be the actual habitation sites somewhere at a distance. So there has to be an entirely different perspective to be adopted in understanding the megalithic communities. I mean, as you rightly pointed out, Iron Age communities. It may not be the megalithic communities, the right term to call this things. And yeah, I mean, we may have a lot of questions in the Q&A section,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I would request,
All right.
my colleague Sharda to moderate the Q&A section. Thank you.
Okay, Professor Selvakumar, I'll only take those which look interesting or different, or maybe you haven't addressed them in your talk, and I'll try to kind of filter some of the repeated ones or common ones. So I will begin with Gauri, who asks, are there any differences between the South Indian and the Sri Lankan megalithic culture?
See, megalithic burial types are similar, but in Sri Lanka, what happens is we have in some of the burials graffiti marks. That is something very interesting. So we can say there is some similarity. There is some similarity. As I say, you find similarity is there, and also they have black and red wear, but we are not able to interpret what really caused this. So it is a very complicated process. Definitely, I think people and interaction might have been there. So you also find this black and red wear in many parts of South Asia, right? So there is some similarity, but some of these burials are slightly different in terms of their monumentality, because sometimes huge monumental menhirs, dolmens have been found there. And what you have here is some of the dolmens are not that big. But when you come to South India, definitely you have, lot of these diversity in burial types and neighborhoods. Yes.
Okay. Ambili asks, there are a couple of questions, but I'll take the last one. So it is observed that there are limited number of megaliths or megalithic sites in North India when compared to the South. What might be the reason for that?
Yeah, I think it is something to do with the, the belief system and ideology. So it is the belief system and ideology that determines why people and how people treat the dead. And maybe they had a different kind of way of treating the dead. But definitely you have burials reported, but not like the way we have, huge stone monuments.
Okay, so an anonymous attendee asks, what is the significance of portholes?
Portholes, generally, we don't know why they made these portholes. There is one view that these people believed in the soul. Maybe like if they are creating a chamber, if the chamber, the conception is same way, it is a living space for the dead. We have our own house. It is a living space for humans who are alive. Same way, when they conceived a space that needs to have an entrance. So this is where we get into their brain. So they try to construct a space like the way, we do. Why all the gods are like humans? Why do we have to think a god has to have two hands and two legs? Why God has to have hands and legs? It is our own conception, because we cannot think anything beyond. So same way, the way they conceived a space with a kind of entrance, probably they had that particular notions. So this could be one reason, because sometimes people said they wanted to put some offering, something through that porthole, but we don't find in some of the excavations, I have not seen anything lying directly below the porthole. So probably they conceived it as a kind of space to enter. If you are building something without any entrance, it doesn't make a meaning. So they conceived this as a space for the dead, which should have all the attributes that should be there in an architecture for the living person. That was their visualization, right?
So I guess the next question kind of answers what you have just said. So Jaya asks, why do we call them, or why do we say living dead? Why are they called so?
Living dead because they live, because the burial lives, because they believed that way. So because they believed in some kind of afterlife. And similarly, they lived in the mind of the living. They lived in the mind of the living. But, many of the our own parents, even if they don't have, I mean, especially if those who have passed away, they live in the minds of their sons. And similarly, they live in the burial. That probably people were aware of this particular belief. That is why many of these burials were not destroyed. They are well preserved.
So the same participant, Jaya, has one more question. Two more questions. One is, why the C14 dates of Nakkara are not published? And second question is, why Neolithic and Iron Age periods are overlapping?
So this Anakkara dates, they have not been published because I was planning to visit School of Social Sciences to undertake some analysis. Then that date came just before COVID. So 2 years we are just stuck, not able to travel to look at the material to undertake the analysis. And generally culture, see, we are constructing culture as a period. But it is not it is our own construct. People did not live in that way. It is not necessary as soon as Neolithic somebody started domesticating, it is not necessary that, so come, let's leave hunting, we should all go. That is not the way. Sometimes these cultures, they can continue. For example, hunter-gatherers, even today we have hunter-gatherers in some remote parts of world. Also in India, like you have in Andamans, there are these communities who do not want. Similarly, some people did not prefer. See, it is our notion to look at Neolithic as progressive. These kind of notion, it is not necessary that people have to see that way. Our archaeological culture and cultural sequences, culture chronology, they are just a kind of base for understanding of archaeologies. We should not see it that way. Sometimes these culture, again, it continued. So that is very best explained in the 5 Thinai landscape of the Sangam literature. We can see how this life was variant. So the diversity of subsistence production was introduced during the Neolithic time when people developed this agriculture or agro-pastoralism. But it is not necessary that everybody wanted to follow this. So from there onwards, diversity happened. So that is why we call this as overlap.
Swaminathan has requested your view on the Cane Circle site of Annur near Chengalpattu. He observes that not much research has been done in this area, and he could not find much data on this site.
Actually, I don't know which site is, I need to say, because Chengalpattu was full of archaeological site. We had a lot of lakes and tanks in that area. What happened is, with the expansion of Chennai, many of these sites were destroyed. Even when I was traveling in the 80s by bus, I used to see these burials were simply destroyed in the road expansion activities, and they are there everywhere. So definitely these settlements, these burials existed in many of these sites, and they are exactly, you can refer to Ancient India report on Sanur. They will probably of the same type, and also Sirdavur recently, Satyabama, ASI, they have published. You can check the report. They have probably identical material.
Okay. So Julio has two questions. One is, can we consider the idea that some perishable materials like wood were used together with stones in some of these architectures like cane circles? And second question is, what could be the future protection actions for these sites, which are right now at the mercy of developers?
One thing is that it is possible because in some of the sites in Kerala, rocket caves, we found grooves, and it is probable that these people had wood as part of these burials. But unfortunately, we don't have any surviving evidence for that. And wooden coffin, I think Wheeler mentions probably wooden coffins were used at Brahmagiri. Probably they could have, they definitely used wood. And for protection, this is one issue we have, because the government has to come up with some kind of strategy. At least some sites, they need to be protected. But from our own understanding, what happens when we visit and travel these people, especially when the government wanted to take some sites and develop as a museum, sometimes people have reservation because they feel it is against against their own land, and they don't want to give their land, because that is the experience recently when we are going for field work. People don't want to allow us into their field. That is why at some of the site we could not do any survey. Sometimes we had to abandon. Sometimes they say that they are against, even if you are taking a tape, measuring tape, they are scared. And this is a problem. And I think one thing is some kind of salvage excavations could be undertaken. For that, government needs to allot money. They have to develop some strategy. Sites that are, facing destruction, they can be excavated first. And if there is any development coming, some kind of salvage, we don't have that CRM regulations. I don't think that can be implemented so easily. But I think we need to think about the protection on recovery of the data, related to history by developing certain measures. And I feel that the government needs to take some action in this regard.
Okay. So there are some questions related to menhirs. So I'll ask them together. Satya asks that how to identify the burial site, especially that of a menhir. How do we distinguish it from a normal rock, for instance? And Himanshu Shekhar asks, do you think we need to have more excavations of menhirs, as we have just 4 or 5 menhir sites excavated till now, and it is declared that they are non-sepulchral with limited excavated data?
Yes, I think we need to excavate more menhir. And sometime I think in Kerala there was a menhir excavated, and they did find some remains. In some areas they did not find. We need to have more excavation, because a burial cannot be understood without excavating it. Whatever we do on the surface may not tell. I can tell you the case of Anakara, where there is a slab circle. We did not expect any kind of rocket cave there, but actually it turned out to be a rocket cave. You can never classify it without excavation. What was, I answered both the questions, I guess. Yeah.
Yes. Shikharai has 2 questions. Can we relate megaliths with consciously creating the sacred landscape, like we have an example from the site of Gobekli Tepe, so that communities can be integrated? And secondly, how can we relate megaliths with changing climatic conditions and changing socioeconomic conditions like resource management and interactions with diverse local and regional cultures?
These megaliths could be some kind of sacred. Definitely, it was some kind of sacred spot, sacred area, which could unite people of a particular clan. Probably, sometime we don't know who gave the grave goods. Sometime they could have been given by the kings themselves. And also the marking of graffiti could have some meaning. Definitely, we should consider them as a kind of sacred spot. There is a poem in the Sangam literature which mentions about a lady giving some kind of offering and worship, in the sense that she was applying some kind of clay and maintaining something like a burial, which I have mentioned in one of my paper. That means These burials were not abandoned after construction. People who were related to that dead person were worshipping for some time and then probably discontinued. It is not like modern day burial cremation ground where people go and bury and then the bones are put into the river, sent to the river or immediately thrown outside and another body. But here, probably they had a kind of clear marker. They definitely wanted people not to disturb them. That is why they had a marker and people had some connection. Definitely, yes, they were marking the space, and also they acted as some kind of spot which united people at least for one time. Whether we don't know whether they were doing any kind of activity later on. In the case of Kerala, sometimes some of these rocket caves were probably dug and reused and converted into shrine. Many of these were converted into a shrine in the later. In the medieval inscription, it is mentioned that they are mentioned as Kalasa Kadu. Kalasam means this vessel. So vessel or urn. So there is a reference, and definitely there was some at one point people had an attitude toward the landscape as well as the resources. So they were not bothered much. They were depositing all the valuable goods into that. Maybe after some time they found they had a different kind of belief system. They abandoned this practice. The very fact that they abandoned this practice indicates their change in attitude to resource use.
So I think this kind of answers several other questions which are trying to link the environment with the typology of the burials or this concept of sacred landscape. So I will move on to the other questions. Vinoy Joseph asks, we have a number of foreign accounts with regard to the international exchange during the early centuries of Common Era. How far were we able to relate to the material life of the megalithic people with those accounts like that of Pliny or Ptolemy or other such writers?
For example, this site of Sutkeni and also near Auroville, Pondicherry, it has produced lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli, it is there in Louvre Museum, France, and it was excavated by the Sutkeni. It was excavated by Casal. So this lapis lazuli is there in the megalithic burial, means that it definitely indicates a long distance trade network. That is why I said that there is one coin, Roman coin, late Roman coin found in a burial from Nilgiris. So some of these burials were of later period. So we also get a lot of gold ornament, for example, Sutukeni and a few other sites in Kerala. We do not know if these people acquired these gold through the Roman coins. We don't know. It is difficult to say when gold started coming here to South India abundantly. We also, some scholars say that Hatti mines were exploited during the early period. So definitely we can say these people had a long distance connection. Again, Cornelian, it is attributed to Gujarat. The presence of Cornelian itself suggests that existence of long distance network covering within South Asia. Similarly, the shells definitely connect with the coastal area. Definitely there existed this network. Arti Deshpande has published on the network of this shell network in the Deccan Chalcolithic and the Neolithic site. So definitely, these network developed in the Neolithic time and late Neolithic onwards. The only thing is we are not able to understand because we have not excavated the right site.
Arjun R has two questions. I'll take them one by one. We have developed a perspective that one habitation must have one burial or vice versa. However, we have recorded multiple megalithic sites surrounded by a single habitation. Often, off-sites are also found to be associated with megalithic sites. Perhaps more thorough surveys are required. So I guess, okay, this is a comment, actually, not a question. And perhaps you agree with him or...
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yes. And the second, again, I think this is also a comment, an observation he has made, that the political or social hierarchy based on the burial types seems inappropriate. There are mixed types of megalithic types in the larger burial complex. It is my opinion that we need to reframe with a few theories.
Yeah, it may not be like hierarchy. The word hierarchy itself is problematic. And again, as I said, I have listed a number of factors. It is attitude. See, like Binford mentioned about ideotechnique, socio-technique, that is a material approach. Sometimes it so happens, if it is something to do with the affection. Suppose if somebody has more association, more respect, they may just give a lot of things. It doesn't mean that the person actually had a higher hierarchy, but normally it is an assumption that archaeologists have to make. That is there in us. So if this many, if the higher the number, the better the chances of this person being in hierarchy. So this is only a norm, but definitely there could be exception. That is that kind of norms we use in archaeological research. Higher the quantity of cornelian beads found, the higher the energy spent, higher the value, maybe higher the status. We do that. Higher the, maybe we have to reframe such kind of things. Yeah, I agree. Hierarchy is a word which is very difficult. Sometimes it may be the social relationship, something to elder, ilayer, these kind of senior, that reference occurs in literature. Ilayor, Mutor. So it is, we can say senior, junior, that kind of classification exists in literature as we understand.
I think we have time for another 2 or 3 questions. So I'll, okay. The next one is by Professor Daniela De Simone or De Simone. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, from Kent University. The question is, you mentioned the close relation between the megalithic burials and the surrounding landscape. What does the site distribution suggest? Are there any specific features of the landscape near which megalithic monuments are built? In the Nilgiri Hills, for example, they were built on mountain tops. But what are the main features in the plain areas?
So plain areas also, they selected wherever there are hillocks, they prefer to locate close to the hillock. For example, I can give the case study of Papinayakanpatti and Vittilpatti, several other sites. They prefer to locate the burial near to the hillock. For it may be because you get a lot of rocks necessary for the construction of the burial. Otherwise, if you want to build a burial, sometime you may have to carry forward. Generally, the rule is they prefer to locate these burials very close to the hillocks, because these in the landscape, cultivation always being undertaken on the eastern side in Tamil Nadu. Because if you look at many parts of South India, the slope is on the south eastern side. The very Tamil term itself, low, means for the direction. Tamil term for direction for east is low, west is up. So there is some kind of relationship, Kiழக்கு, மேற்கு. So when they probably in some areas they built a tank. See, ideally the tank was built on the top of the area. Then the cultivable lands were on the eastern side of the tank. Sometime when there is water, even in the later period tanks, if you see, the water overlaps and comes up to the megalithic burial. I notice in several sites, even in Sanur, they choose to locate nearby the hillock, probably because they were using the loose boulders for the construction of the megalithic burial. This could be one reason. At the same time, probably they did not want to burial in the cultivable area. Definitely, we have reference to Kulakil Vilai Sennel, the rice being cultivated on the eastern side of the tank. That means they would not build their burial on the eastern side. You can see in Chengalpattu region, many of these burials are located adjacent to the hills, right at the base of the hills. So this could be one of the reasons, because two purpose, you don't have to transport the stone for a long distance. At the same time, you are using the pasture. Actually, interestingly, some of these sites where you have burial, they could be used as a pastoral land. This even today it happens. These are the areas where cultivation has not been taken place. It was not possible for the later people to cultivate. What happened was, after the introduction of earth movers in Tamil Nadu before 1980s, there were not earth movers. People, they could not lift. After the introduction of earth movers, many of the farmers, they tried to expand agriculture. They start, even the borewell technology became very strong. So even the dry regions where these burials were undisturbed, because of the borewell technology and the earth mover technology, they started bringing more land under cultivation. And also when people went outside India, it is a fashion to have farmland. Many people in the Coimbatore region, where you don't normally have coconut trees, they will buy with a lot of money, they will buy huge farmland and then plant coconut. In the process, this even today it is happening. Sometimes deep borewell technology, and this has led to the agricultural expansion. So there is a conscious attempt to use, again, when there is a hillock, they put one dolmen on top. This has happened. Sometime one dolmen on top of a hillock is recorded near Uttiramerur. These things are also there. Again, near Madurai, but there is a stone. This is very interesting. I did not show. I removed the photograph because of lack of time. There is a burial. You will not see anything. You will just see a dolmen, stones planted and a stone lying. You cannot date it. How will you know whether this was done some 100 years back or 2000 years back? There are some dolmens which are, they have just a stone placed, nothing else. Maybe it could be an actual kind of dolmen, or this was later. Such kind of dry dolmens, that means we don't have any content, but intentionally when they build a dolmen on top of the hills, they create artificially the boundary. That is why you have stone enclosure in the Western Ghat region, both in Tamil Nadu as well as, they were conscious that the burial goods and the things, they should not be eroded by rain. That is why they create a stone enclosure. Then they buried. For that, intentionally they were lifted the soil from the ground, so which required a lot of effort. So the hilltops were considered as a sacred kind of place. Again, you have a reference in literature as the top of the hill being kind of a kind of power or ananga associated with. They talk about, literature talks about Nedu Varai, a kind of tall hill with some kind of power. Even the Murugan, Lord Muruga is always placed on top of a hill in the later period. So the top of the hill is always a point. Again, if you see a kind of Tamil Nadu landscape where you find a lot of granite, inselbergs, the Kal, even that happens in Karnataka. Any place with the suffix Kal will have a hill. And this hill will have a water spring. That will be definitely a site, archaeological site. So the burials and also the caves, rocket caves, all these were located adjacent to the hills for various reasons. And the cultivable land and also the areas very close to the floodplains or near the river, there they did not create the burial. So there is an intentional choice in selecting certain landscape for the construction of the burial.
Okay, I will take one last question, which is by Mr. T.S. Subramaniam. He says that a few weeks ago, he was shown at Adichanallur a single urn packed with cane stones on top. Is it something rare? other urns in the same trench did not have these cairn packing on top. You also mentioned the occurrences of urns heaped with cairns. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, sometimes again it is we can attribute this to individual behavior and anomaly. So suppose if a task is given, you select 10 people to undertake a task, it is not necessary they will execute in the same way. So there is a change in individual behavioral pattern. So this kind of anomalies happens in the case of burials. So that cannot be anything. That is how archaeology also take their interpretation. They try to look into the pattern, feature, and structure, and then say something unique. So this could be just the view and attitude of the person or the people who created these burial.
Okay. So I think we've taken a lot of questions. I will now ask Professor Michel to.
I have one information to share actually. I mean, Swaminathan, he asked about the Arnold Site, right? It is located in Chengalpattu on the banks of River Pala, and it's a ASI protected site. And it has large megaliths. I mean, large circles. Maybe the cans they have been removed, but even now it is being vandalized.
Yeah, it happens. Sometimes even the protected sites are vandalized. Sometimes because it's very difficult to conserve some sites, and more awareness is needed. Actually, it's the people who need to protect these monuments. Local bodies and panchayats, they have to be given, because that is how happened in the medieval time. There is an inscription in Pudukkottai which refers that even if we fight among ourselves, we will not cut the trees that are found in the on the banks of the tank. That is how this inscription says. So maybe involving people and local bodies can help, and also we can find alternate use for these kind of burials, because as I said, some of the burial sites were used as pasture land, because this kind of construction of the burial will not hinder that particular kind of activity. Because I have seen many of the sites when I was exploring in Madurandagam in 1989 and 90, and these pastoral communities will be there in the megalithic site, because that is the area that was not cultivated then. No wetland cultivation is possible in a megalithic site unless you dig or anything. So they were on a higher landscape, but cultivation like all these groundnuts would be possible if somebody plants, somebody removed all those megalithic burials.
Maybe heavy machinery was not available at the point of
and
time.
Also deep,
now with the availability of JCB,
deep bore wells.
very easily they can move all these
deep
boulders.
Now you can easily get a bore machine can reach 1,000 meter and then get water. So, and also people have money to invest, and people feel owning a farmhouse is a prestige, even if they have a house or 2 or 3 apartments in a town, in a city. And these kind of activities also can lead to the destruction of landscape, and people feel that it is our land, and whenever government goes, they said why we should give that particular land, because people were not willing to, generally they are not willing to give their land. This is one of the issues.
I think one more reason for the kind of large scale pillaging or destruction of this megalithic sites is that disconnect between the present day population and the ancient traditions.
Definitely.
Somehow correlate with the Northwest America, where they have, USA, they have a separate legislation to protect the native Indian burial sites. Nobody can go and even excavate a burial site. So only after getting permission from the native Indians, they can excavate. We have this disconnect. If connect would have been there, then these destructions might not have happened.
Yeah, definitely there is a disconnect. And also in a city now, why Chennai today? I just saw in the newspaper that Chennai some people live in 1 feet water within the house in the ground floor, because in early settlement, if you look at in Chennai region, all the sites with the temple and inscriptions, they will specifically mention about the water course and the sites. So now, because of lack of space, people built house everywhere. So they were not bothered about the drainage channel. So if they had respected the general natural flow streams and drainage channel, this would not have happened. So they had an understanding of the landscape, but people who are in the modern time, they don't have time for. So now we see land as only a resource. There is no organic relationship, maybe.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I would request Professor Michel if he has any final words to say.
Nothing much, except that as everybody else, I found this talk fascinating. Professor Selva, what I appreciate a lot is that you bring so much of conceptual clarity, and this is very rare. It's not about describing the objects, the artifacts, the monuments. You are gently challenging decades and decades of stereotyping those cultures, whether Neolithic, Megalithic, early historical, and also building bridges between them, which is very important. And again, our stereotypes have sharply divided those periods as if they were watertight, and you are showing the continuities. So I think you are showing the road ahead, and we'll just have to hope that the preservation side follows in proportion. Otherwise, we may not have much to study after a few more years. So thank you so much. It was brilliant. And I have shared with on the chat box 2 links to two earlier talks that you gave at IIT Gandhinagar. That was exclusively the early historical period and the Sangam literature and so on. So the formative stage of the historical society for those who would like to see. Thank you so much. It was very, very interesting.
Thank you, Professor Selva, and I also thank all the participants who listened to this lecture, and I extend the invitation well in advance for the next lecture, again in the last Saturday of next month. Thank you one and all.
Yeah, some connection problem. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.